Welcome to the Private Lenders Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the show. Chris and Jason here. We had a good question come in from one of the Inner Circle members recently. She emailed us asking about legacy planning. Like, what are we going to do with this business later on when we're old, if we pass away, next generation? And that's a topic that we discuss pretty frequently, actually, probably more often than people might guess. That topic of what this company looks like towards the end of our generation into the next one. So yeah, we're going to dive into a few things.
Yeah, no, agreed. Good topic. Glad she brought that up because it's, like you said, it's definitely something that's discussed. And, you know, I feel like we've always kind of been on top of wills and trusts and things like that. And in essence, just like anything else, you know, it's good to kind of have conversations, consult with attorneys, figure out what they think, and then you make a business decision of what works best for you, because what might be ideal on paper or ideal in a perfect world might not be ideal for the way that you have things set up, and it might be a headache. So you kind of do some of these things over time. This topic can go in a few different directions. So we're gonna jump, I think, into two key points. Like, what happens if, like, you know, you drop dead immediately? Like, what happens there? And then also, we're going to discuss a little bit about, like, what happens if your kids want to be involved in this operation, or family members want to be in operation, and how that would look, what that would look like kind of down the road. So let's talk about, you know, if you know, you die down the road and what happens. So I guess it kind of depends on your situation. If you're a one-man operation, or if you have a business partner, or if you have other folks involved in the operation. Now, obviously, if you're a one-man band, then, you know, hopefully you have some stuff set up where you can assign, you know, an attorney, or maybe a spouse or kids, some involvement to, in essence, wind down the business and wind down the notes. Because really, the majority of the assets in this operation are the actual private notes in general. You know, like, those are the assets. And if you're using your own capital and you're the sole lender, or if you're you had outside investors that were involved in these. And not that there's not any real value to these lending companies, because there certainly are, right? There's values in the brand. There's certainly values to your borrower database and your investor database. But the real assets of what need to be taken under control and wind down are the notes, the individual notes. So let's just say you have 100 notes in general, and you never, you know, nobody wants to continue to do more notes or no more loans. And in essence, it's just servicing those existing notes until, you know, they're all paid back over time.
Yeah, one other thing we put in place pretty early on was we did business life insurance policies for each one of us, where with the company as the beneficiary, to go along with the operating agreement. And the operating agreement discussed a lot of stuff. We did a big built out one a lot of years ago, a dozen years ago or something. And it discusses a lot of this stuff, like, you know, if the company is the beneficiary of a life insurance payout, if one of us passes away, and then that money can be used to buy out that partner's heirs, right? That's typically the smart way to do it. Yeah, so I remember we did that a while early on. We did those business policies and had it in accordance with the operating agreement. So I definitely recommend doing that stuff too. There's also wrap up, you know, wind down operation stuff that goes into the operating agreement. And I think that, yeah, especially if you're a one-man band, defining like what's going to happen to the operation, because you're talking a lot of outstanding money, a lot of outstanding loans, and situations that need to be handled. So I would definitely put that stuff in writing sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and keep in mind, like, we talked about the value of a hard money lending company, and that's kind of been a hot topic across the boards. Like, are these companies even sellable? And I don't want to say that they're fully contingent on the owner operators, because that's not necessarily true. But, like, a lot of the value is how you know, the receivables owed to you on the notes. So let's just say, you know, you are using all investor capital, none of your own, and you have $10 million, right, deployed in outstanding notes of other investors' capital, and you're lending it out at, call it 12.99, and the investors are, let's say 13% of your investors are getting 10%. So that means you're due a 3% servicing fee. So in essence, you know, assuming the notes are all short-term notes, you know, in a perfect world, you'd be receiving $300,000 in receivables from that if they all, you know, whatever. In a perfect world, they all stay out for another year. That's 3% of 10 million. So that's kind of an easy way kind of to determine, you know, how much is owed, you know, what is due, and who knows. It's hard to put a price tag on a company like this, right? Because, you know, if we just took over an operation from scratch in a different market, let's just say in Nevada, I don't know, just a random market, and it was like, hey, here's my book of business. Who knows what we could turn that into, right? If we didn't have any of our own investors that we had relationships, if we didn't have any borrowers that we had relationships with there, who knows? So yeah, I mean, I think just like anything else, it's a niche business model, and you kind of put things in place of what you want to happen, what you're, you know, of what you want to happen, and I think that works. And another concept, anything else related to that, Chris, or should I move on to the next setup?
You want to move on to the next generation topic?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that.
So one of the topics that Chris and I have always discussed, because we're both at the point where, you know, even though none of our kids are in the workforce, like that'll happen sooner than later.
I mean, we have teenagers. Like, it's not that far off.
Yeah. And we got, and, you know, and I don't want to say, and we haven't had like formal expressed interest of like, hey, I want to work at H&B when I grow up, but like it certainly could happen. And if they want to be involved, I want to make sure there's a home for them to be involved. And we kind of look at it like two different ways. So let's say you have kids or friends or whoever that want to be involved in the business. There's two ways to be involved. So number one would be if they wanted to be an employee of the business and there was a job opening for them, right? I'm not saying like you could create a job that doesn't currently exist, but let's say there is a job opening, a processor or accountant or, you know, a property inspector, something that they are qualified for or that we could train them for and pay them a reasonable salary based on what the going rate is. That's obviously one option, right? That's a pretty easy option, right? If they're qualified for that. But I think the one intriguing option is, I think most people listening to this right now, lenders that are listening to this, is I think anybody would be happy to take on a loan originator that is willing to go out there and originate business. So I think that's kind of a very easy way to be like, hey, son, you want to be involved in this business and you want to, you know, you want to really be involved and learn this business, get out there and start finding deals. Go find deals and you get a rub of every deal that comes in, right? There's no salary, no stipend. Like, go out there and earn it and learn that way. And again, not everybody's going to want to do that, but like if I'm saying like, hey, Dad, I really want to be a hard money banker or a hard money lender. I really want to work for hard money bankers. Like, I'll do whatever it takes. Like, tell me what's up. Like, I'm not asking for a handout type of thing. Like, tell me what I need to do. And it's like, great, let's go help you find deals. And no doubt you can help them, train them to go find deals, but anyone would do that, right? Like, if there was 20 people, knocking on my door right now that says, hey, can I go find you deals and you'll pay me a commission off everything that I find that makes sense? Absolutely. No problem. I'm happy to. So I think that's kind of a good open-ended way to potentially bring the next generation or a family member or a friend into the business that wants to learn it by teaching them, helping them find deals, and paying them a commission on every deal that comes in.
Yeah, when this topic comes up with my kids, I leave it pretty open-ended because it's just too soon to say what people are going to be into, you know, what they end up studying, what they end up wanting to do for work, what kind of, you know, operators, what kind of drive they have as business people in the future. We're just not there yet, right? So I leave it as like, you know, we'll see what you're into, we'll see what you study, see what you like, you know, it's an option. So, you know, we'll make decisions on that, you know, slowly and carefully and into the future. But I also want to talk about the topic of the next generation when it comes to assets, because it's pretty tied into what we're talking about with a lending company that we view as a family office down the road. And not only a lending company, but the other stuff we do within our operation, like equity investing and stuff like that, right? A little bit of stock stuff, what have you. Because we do want to, you know, it's an interesting topic. This definitely comes up in other content that I see in YouTube and podcasts of what how you want to handle the kids and the assets, because there are definitely wrong ways to do it. Like if a young adult gets a whole bunch of money, before they're old enough and responsible enough to handle it, and also depending on their personality type and everything else, that can really mess up their life, right? Like if somebody has no need for progress, for learning, for having a goal, and they're just a bunch of money is dumped in their lap, and kind of allows them to not have to do anything, like that can really, really damage people's lives. But at the same time, I don't totally agree with. I heard Cody Sanchez talking about this recently, and my opinion is kind of the same as hers, where some people are completely giving all of the, really wealthy, famous people, totally giving all of the assets away outside of the family, and very specifically not giving any to the kids. And I don't agree with that either. Like, I think that part of what we're doing with these kids is hopefully training them and molding them and educating them into being a good steward of the family's assets in that generation when we're old or not around anymore and all that. I think there's a blend between don't dump a bunch of money on their lap that could potentially damage their lives and their need for progress and having a goal themselves, but at the same time, like, let's not just blow the money and give it all outside the family. Like, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense either. There's definitely a balance between the two that is going to be a big part of our future.
Yeah, I mean, what my vision or game plan with, which I know is not going to be which is not going to be smooth, that what I'm about to say. But like, I'll tell you what's exactly on my mind, that in a perfect world, I hope that this happens. And I know it won't happen perfectly like this, but what I would like to happen, which is kind of a win-win on all sides, is, hey, listen, we have capital, our own. We also control other people's capital that would love to get a good, fair rate of return on that capital. You find deals, opportunities, create a business, do anything that you want that needs capital injected to it, and let's partner on that opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, hey, listen, you go find all the hard money deals that you want. And, at some point, when I'm a little bit more removed from this business, just pay me as a capital investor 10% and you do everything else. And that's a fair setup, just like we pay our capital investors today. Now, I know that's easier said than done, but like, that's like, in a perfect world, the way I look at it as is like, hey, you have unlimited opportunities. You might not see that right now because I'm not actually giving you, let's just say, it's $100,000 for a note or an investor in a business. I'm not physically giving you this $100,000 to do whatever you can with it. But if you find a good opportunity, and, let me be your capital investor, and let's work on doing that. Now, I know that there's going to be speed bumps along the way, right? Because they're going to be like, you're too conservative, or like, I can go find easier capital or cheaper capital or this or that. It's like, okay, so do so. We had a capital investor in our office the other day who has a pretty intelligent son who is in college, and he just bought his first 2-family building in Pittsburgh, and he lives local to us. And he's learning a lot from doing that. And his dad, who was a capital investor of ours for a while, did everything to help him besides actually put up the capital, right? And he's got plenty of capital. He could have funded this little rinky-dink $170,000 2-unit. But he helped him throughout the whole process, and he, traded time or money for time for money. Or traded time, I guess. He doesn't really have an economic interest in it, but he traded to help him with the educational side of it. And his son went to a bank to get it. And I think the rest of the capital came from like a friend that he borrowed money from. I'm not actually sure where.
I think it was the son's own savings.
Okay. His own savings. But I was like, listen, like, if his son's smart, right. And opportunistic, if he's out there grinding to find deals, like, why don't you just be the capital investor? And I think he didn't say he wasn't or he would never be. I think it was more of like, hey, I want to teach him how to raise capital himself. And there's a lot of value that you can provide to your kids besides just the money aspect. You can teach them how to fish, how to do so. And and maybe that's like step one, in their 20s, the game plan. And then they learn it. You help them learn it. Then after they learn it, it's like, hey, listen, let's partner on these things. I'm going into this and I'm hoping that it happens like this. And I know, again, it's not going to be smooth like this, of like, hey, let's work together. let's create a business of whatever you're interested in. If the deal makes sense, if the business makes sense, I've got the capital that I'm willing to deploy, and we can partner on it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that part up because I hadn't totally thought about it that way. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be HMB. It could be, this family office organization investing in a different kind of business that the next generation wants to run. That's a really good point. It doesn't have to be the stuff we made.
And it could also be like, hey, I'm grinding and I'm at college and I'd like to, I'd like to buy a house and then rent it out to my 4 friends and then in essence live there for free and then I don't have to pay rent. Could you help me buy one? Okay, let's look to see how we can create something like that. Maybe teach them to try to get a loan and then you come up with the capital and say, I'm going to keep 25% plus you're going to pay me a 10% pref on that capital, for helping you in this particular case. And not necessarily, I'm not saying pay me for my time. I'm saying pay me for my capital. Obviously you're going to help your kid whatever way you can and educate them. But when you're putting up capital to, you're probably going to get whatever the going rate of return is for something like that. And I think the two value things is you can bring capital to the table and you can bring the education and experience that you have to the table. And listen, working with kids is challenging. We all know that, might clash and be like, listen, dummy, like you're not doing this right. Like that's not easy to do to train somebody, but you never know. You never know what direction that's going to go to. And, maybe they don't have the entrepreneurial spirit and maybe they don't want to do any of that stuff. And that's fine as well. But this, particular topic, I think is based on, hey, if they're interested and you want to set up something for your kids in the future, there is a home or an opening inside all of our operations.
Yeah, it's an important thing to consider, and depending on the age of the next generation, kind of gives you the timeline of when you need to, really look into that, put the kind of things on paper that we were talking about before. And we've seen it before in the previous generation of lenders, a decade older than us, not a decade, I should say a generation older than us, and about how they were starting to integrate some kids. And I think to varied success, I think that some of those arrangements worked out better than others. Because the next generation doesn't always have what the founders had, and then the generation after that, but in a perfect world, we're going to have, a couple good operators coming out of this flock, on either one of our sides. So I ideally we can keep it going into the next generation. Like you don't want to, there's capital risk. Like you don't want to have the wrong operator, with their finger on the button for that whole thing. But hopefully that's the case, hopefully it is the good fit with, 1 or 2 or 3 of our kids, whatever it ends up being.
No doubt.
Good question. Glad that was asked. If you want to continue the conversation, come check us out inside the Mastermind group. That is hardmoneymastermind.com. And we'll see everyone here next time as well on the Private Lenders Podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.